Okay, and we are live. That was me channeling my inner Donna Orender. So welcome to Refresh, everyone. I'm Sherry Levin. I am usually the woman behind the scenes, behind the curtain, producing, but right now I have a dual role because Donna's doing a very exciting thing this morning, and she is wrapping up as the moderator for the United Nations General Assembly Conference 2020 panel on women empowerment and gender equality. So I'm sure she will come back with lots and lots of information to talk to us about. So she will be here momentarily. We are in Refresh number 25, and I am thrilled to welcome Maryam Banikarim. I first met you, Maryam, at Generation W 2018 for Rise and Shine. And you were someone who really epitomizes what Rise and Shine is all about. I will give a little bit of your bio. I did have to condense it because it was so long and so in-depth. So you are currently the head of marketing at Nextdoor. You have had more than 25 years of marketing experience managing global brands and international teams. You most recently, the global CMO of Hyatt Hotels, repositioning the Hyatt brand as purpose-driven by putting the guest at the center of the business. Prior to Hyatt, Maryam was SVP and CMO of Gannett and Senior Vice President at NBC Universal and Chief Marketing Officer for Univision Communications, Inc. You have always dug in and taken on the challenges of building and creating national marketing strategies and community. Your achievements have been widely recognized. In 2017, you were named to the Forbes Most Influential CMOs, AgencySpotter Top 20 Women in Marketing, and Brand Innovators Top 100 Women in Brand Marketing. We are thrilled to have you here today. It is great to see you again in this world of Zoom shows. And you have never been one to sit around and to wait for things to come to you. You have always been someone who has been proactive and always someone who has wanted to grab a hold of things and go get things. I would love you to start and tell our audience a bit about your journey and your chapters and choices.
So thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be back with your audience. You know, Gen W holds a special place in my heart. So, you know, it's funny, my husband said to me this morning, you just can't sit still. And I think I get that from my grandmother. She was like that. And I think it is a little bit true. I feel sort of like you only live once. So like, are you going to make the most of it? And for me, it's really a lot about motion forward and sort of figuring out how to compartmentalize my fear so that it doesn't actually stop me from just going ahead, right? I think I heard Shonda Rhimes talk about how she wanted to be Toni Morrison, but instead of waiting to become Toni Morrison, she started doing things, and she became Shonda Rhimes, and that sort of stuck with me because I think, you know, just if you wait for perfection or the thing you think you should be doing, like that actually can sometimes become daunting. But if you just put one foot in front of the other, like that motion sort of puts you out into the universe and things will show up, right? And I think if I go back and think about my life, I do think that that's sort of been a little bit about sort of what my journey's been like. And I do think about it in terms of chapters and choices instead of balance. I think women all the time talk about, you know, work-life balance, and we now have lots of people talking about work-life balance, but I never really found that that was something that worked, but more it was about making different choices and trade-offs in different chapters of my life, right? So obviously when I was single, I could make different trade-offs. When I got married or had children, that was sort of different as sort of the journey through your family or, you know, whatever you're juggling, you end up having to make trade-offs, right? And I think one of the reasons I've been able to continue along this path is that I've had a pretty amazing support system, right? Whether it was Rocio, who helped me raise the kids, her and Sophia, or, you know, friends or colleagues at work, right? Like there were times where things were complicated with the kids, particularly like in their middle school years. And I had a real support system of people who I work with, and we all sort of covered for each other, right? And so that enabled us to be able to be like, okay, you go do what you're doing, I'll take this, right? And I think part of that was like just authentically being open about the fact that it was complicated and not sort of trying to sugarcoat that. I used to look at female executives and think that they seemed like they were so perfect or so put together, and I never knew how they did that. And for me, it's kind of like you get what you see. And so I'm very open about talking about how I don't have all the answers and how it is complicated and it is a journey. Really, the reason I think Donna always asks about the choices and chapters is that, you know, I have been fortunate to have sort of this career that has gotten me to this point, which is amazing when you think about it, because I am a kid who grew up originally in Iran, right? We immigrated to the United States by way of Paris after the 1979 revolution. I grew up in the suburbs of San Francisco where, you know, I was clearly not like everybody else, but you know, I sort of didn't really think of it that way. And I just sort of kept doing. I remember showing up in junior high. We'd just come from Paris. So I sort of wore like this poofy skirt and I had lace up ballet shoes and a little Petit Bateau t-shirt, and everybody wore Calvin Klein jeans and Izod. So now you know how old I am, because I was in the Brooke Shields era. And I knew immediately that I didn't look like everybody else. And I don't just mean like, you know, my, you know, hair color and whatever, but I just mean like even from an outfit perspective, right? So that night I went home and I was like, I need to go to the mall and get clothes so that I blend in and look like everybody else. Because at that age, that's really what we all wanted. And I remember at the time, you know, my name is Maryam, but it was easier for people to call me Mary. And I sort of was like, okay, you know, I sort of went along with that. And really, even then in junior high, I remember joining every single after club that there was, like whether it was bowling or softball, right? We didn't have softball in Iran. I just joined, and I didn't care if I was like literally on the C team. I just wanted to participate. And I think that's been a little bit about sort of my attitude about life. Like, I don't worry about how people are going to perceive me or if I'm going to be bad at it. I generally know most people are smarter than me. So I'm not afraid to ask the questions. And I just figure, like, if I just go out and do, like, doing will actually get me there, right? And I think a little bit of humility of knowing all the things you don't know so that I'm willing to ask the questions and sort of take the input has also been key.
That's amazing. And, you know, you mentioned Shonda Rhimes, and there was one thing I was at where she had talked about we are all the main character in our own stories, yeah, which has always stuck with me. And I think that's something that you brought up. But I'd love to know in terms of where you sit, like how the community aspect has become so near and dear to you, and taking it along in the marketing. I am going to try to let, here's Donna's in now.
Let Donna in. Hi, Donna.
I'm you.
Hi, I'm so sorry, guys. How's everybody? Hi, everyone.
Where are we? Changing the world, right? And bringing gender equality into focus. So thank you.
Yes, our community, our neighborhoods were very, very broad this morning. And I don't know, like my panelists, I just have to share this. My panelists were from Nepal. Literally, she was in Nepal. Russia, and she said, welcome to Russia, like, so we were in Russia. It's amazing what technology can do. The UK and the US. Pretty cool, right? All about gender equality. I have all these notes that will be rich for this community as time comes, but I am so excited about you being here. And did we do our tribute to Ruth Bader Ginsburg? I'm just curious.
We have not. So we were chatting and getting caught up with Maryam. I'm going back to being behind the curtain so that I can produce and add in that video. So you can reset.
Okay, and I have Tara on the thing here. Hi, Tara. All right, it's me to start. Hey, Tara. Hello, ladies. All right, great. We're ready to go.
So Donna, I'm going to answer the question she asked before. I'm just going to answer the question they're asking now.
Sure.
And I guess it was really about community. And I think, you know, this is something you and I share. In fact, we met through a community, right, at NBC Universal. I always sort of knew community mattered. I think, you know, my grandmother always had a full house of guests and people, and, you know, she was always sewing or cooking, or, you know, she was a teacher by discipline. I think I sort of always knew that connectivity made for a happier home.
Right.
And so I always sort of cared about that. I think, you know, when we moved into Chelsea 20 years ago, my kids were just born. And I remember the first thing I did was join the Block Association, and I became the secretary on the Block Association. You know, it makes my daughter's eyes roll like, oh, of course you did. But for me, it was not just about joining, but actually like offering to help, right? Which meant they were looking for a secretary. I was like, sure, I'll do it. And, you know, I arranged the ice cream social in Clement Mock Park, right? So I think I just feel like you have to not just, you know, if you can make a difference and help, like you should do that, right? And I think that's what community is all about. And so it's been actually super interesting to join Nextdoor, which is inherently obviously all built on sort of the notion of neighbors and neighborhoods and community.
Absolutely. And I'd be interested to know. I just want to say hello to Joy Kurtz and Joanne Cohen and Kimberly Campbell. We haven't seen you for a while. This is cool. Leah Red, Marian Warren. We have to get together, right? Megan Tobin, Sylvia Bird. This is our community. Like you love, I knew you'd love this. Joy, let's see, Helen Brewer, Ellen Dort, Diane Wright, Debbie Banks. She's with us all the time. I love her to death. David Emanuel, Annie Myers-Drysdale from California, Ann Flipsy, Angie Worth. Angie Worth used to work with us. Adore her. She has the most fabulous travel digital work. And on Facebook, we have Chris Reese. Hey, Chris, and Marianne Jacoby. So we've got these people from all over. So we do have this community. And I think we feel each other. I'd be just curious, anybody here, a member in their neighborhood of?
Nextdoor.
Nextdoor. Do I have to say .com? Is it nextdoor.com or is it just
Nextdoor? Nextdoor.
Nextdoor. It would be just good to know. All right. Now, Maryam, we got to talk. Maryam is, I don't know, one of the most energetic people I know. She's one of the most inspiring people I know. There's nothing that's daunting to her. So I'm going to just start with this little story that I didn't tell you I was going to tell, but actually I love this story. We meet, we become fast friends, right? And we're friends. We make sure we see each other, talk to each other, all these great things. And you're always like, you know, what's to stop you from doing this? What's to stop you from doing that, right? And I was at the WNBA and I was their president. And what was really important to me at this point in time is I really wanted Al Roker, who is the national weatherman on the Today Show, but also does local news in New York. I just loved him. I loved him since I was younger. I don't want to make him feel too old. And, oh, this is delivered? You can deliver. And I'm like, Maryam goes, and she was working at NBC at the time, remember? And I said, Maryam, I really wanted to have Al Roker come to a WNBA game. And you looked at me like, okay, well, what is it going to take to get that done? And just about a couple of weeks later, we did a dads and daughters game. And who did I sit next to for the entire game? But Al Roker. And I loved it because he was there and it was meaningful to me personally, but it was meaningful to our business to have a high profile man at our game. But the process of how you made that happen, somebody's, Ann Flipsy, who is he? Al Roker is the national weatherman, and now he is a storyteller on NBC. I'm surprised yeah, NBC. And he's been there for what, 20 something years, right? So that's who he is. And I just love the way your mind works, which was, hey, you want him? Let's go get him. I'll make a couple of calls. And sure enough, there he was. Now, I'm not inviting anyone else to ask Al Roker here, you know, to be, if they want Al Roker to call you. It's really about your thought process in terms of being proactive and not being fearful. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was, you know, it was fun to have Al come. Obviously, I think what I remember about that event is that we actually got a whole group of girls to come with their dad.
Yes, we did.
I remember they were all excited to actually get on the court and throw the basket and meeting the actual players and how incredibly inspiring that was. Frankly, he was so excited to come, and his daughter Lula was also so excited. So I think it was nice to actually create an event where daughters got to come and share in that moment actually with their fathers. And he's the weatherman on NBC, but he's also a, and so who doesn't want to do that?
No, well, you know, don't dismiss it. But oh my God, listen, I just got to tell you, Angie Orth just reminded me that you introduced us way back when. Angie Orth was in New York, transitioning back to Jacksonville. She worked with us for a while. Now, for some reason, I'm losing some of your audio. I'm not sure why. Sherry, maybe you can help us? Is it just me, everybody?
I don't know. You should. Are you not able to hear me?
I hear you now. I hear you now. So that's good. Anyway, so how cool is that? There's like that. That is a community. That's neighborhood, right? That was, hey, I have a friend. She's coming back. Talk to Donna. And then, of course, she leapfrogged out into the stratosphere in terms of what she did. But actually, she got married in the Bahamas, and I felt like we were part of that, even though we weren't there. It was really kind of cool. So that's really nice. Tell us a little bit about your, like, I love your story. You shared it on the Gen W stage. Sherry, maybe we should run that clip, and we can kind of riff off that because it's pretty cool.
My advice is that you have to go all in. You have to go for it even as it changes. And you have to be willing to fight for your ideas, because it's your ideas that are going to take you places. You have to be willing to put fear aside. We all have it. But if you can overcome obstacles by choosing not to see them, you will make the ultimate difference.
All right.
God, I can't even believe that.
Why? It was so good. That's why?
No, I mean, it's so funny. I mean, it's incredible that you have that video clip, because that seems like a lifetime ago.
Listen, yesterday was a lifetime ago in the time of COVID. I feel like, it's definitely a historical marker in the time of COVID. I use that in parentheses a lot. Hi, Sue Levine. Hi, Becky Steen. They're all following us. So tell us about this idea of fighting for your ideas, because I'm going to ask everybody here, post it on Facebook, post it here on the chat. How many of us are willing to admit that we are fearful about pursuing our ideas or our passion or anything that we have an idea around that we want to execute? I'll raise my hand. I talked to you the other day and I was like, oh my God, why don't I just do this? I'd have to call Maryam. Like, you should create a recording. There's a good business for you. Hi, this is Maryam Banikarim. I'm here to remind you. Anyway, talk to us about that.
We all have fear, right? I mean, I have fear. People, I'll give you a recent story for me. Like, I've been told I should write a book forever, right? I mean, I sort of grew up in a time of revolution, so everybody hears that story and they say you should write a book. And, I've tried it a couple times. Writing a book actually requires, like, being able to sit still. I'm not very good at that, so you won't be surprised to know. But last summer, the summer before, when I took time off in between sort of like Hyatt and this job, I really one of the things I did was like, okay, I'm going to tackle this thing that everybody keeps saying, and I've had starts and fits, and I don't know, it'll just be something to do. And so I decided to take a class. At the time we were living in Chicago, and I registered for a memoir writing class at Second City. To begin with, I started being like, I need to find the perfect writing class, right? And I went through that exercise that we all do to ourselves. And then finally I was like, I'm just going to take the one that fits into my schedule, because that was its own exercise. So I go up at Second City. It's me and 5 other strangers. It was like an episode of NBC's Community. I was totally anonymous, which was kind of amazing. Like, if you're going to write about something personal, like, being anonymous actually helps. And it was a woman who was writing through the voice of her dog, me, and 4 other people. And the teacher gave an assignment, and she said, write a couple pages by the next day, by the next session, which was a weekly class for 6 weeks. I show up at the next class, and most people hadn't written anything. One woman had written the story through the voice of her dog. It was a couple pages. Somebody had written a paragraph, and I showed up with 60 pages. And my husband said to me, oh, she has no idea what's coming her way. And frankly, it was the most hysterical experience, because I wasn't working. So I had time, and I sat down and I sort of just wrote. I wasn't particularly good, but I just wrote. And the teacher sort of looked at me and said, well, we'll take this. And she was getting paid enough to read as many words as I was generating. But that exercise sort of got me into the habit of writing again, right? And it's sort of what led to me writing the piece about taking time off that the New York Times published. And if you had told me that I could get something published in the New York Times, I would never have believed you. But I think it's a little bit, even when the Times called and said they wanted to buy the piece, I remember having this moment of panic and being like, I actually publish this.
Right.
So we always have fear. I just need people to come and tell you to push past that fear, including yourself.
So we're going to go back to some of the places you pushed back your fear, because I think this is important. Just your sheer audacity in the most positive way. But you mentioned something about living through the revolution. Have you talked about that before I came on?
Not really.
No.
I mean, I mentioned that was sort of the beginning for me.
Well, maybe do you want to talk about it?
Sure.
Okay.
Not off limits for you, Donna.
I appreciate that. Well, listen, I remember, I think where were we walking, or we were on the phone, and we were talking about this, and it was very poignant and really important, because it put into, I think it was when all of the racial justice issues, and we're still in protests, it really puts that, it's a companion piece to understanding that, and you've lived through quote unquote revolution. So share it if you would.
I mean, I was I think I was 11. I was in 6th grade when the revolution happened in Iran. And, it's obviously quite memorable, and you sort of experience a lot of chaos that happens on the streets, but also in your own personal life. And I think one of my most vivid memories was sort of how people were willing to sell each other downstream just to save themselves, right? Which this is a story we read in movies or books all the time, right? Where somebody was somebody's best friend, but in order to sort of get out of a hairy situation, they declare publicly in a newspaper that they don't know this person, or whatever the scenario may be. And I think that's why, for me, loyalty became sort of a really critical thing. And also sort of recognizing, I think even then, sort of this idea of having to depend on yourself. I'm totally part of a community. I'm totally connected, but I also sort of early on got the sense of like, you got to be able to stand on your own 2 feet, right? And then sort of with the uncertainty that came from obviously leaving the country sort of overnight, and then sort of landing in different places and having to fit in and find your way. I think, I was saying to somebody earlier, I mean, I was often the other, right? So I lived in Lafayette, which is a beautiful community, but I was very much not like everybody else. And I could have sort of taken that, and that could have been something that stopped me. But for me, I just sort of pushed past that. I now have a visual for that, which I wouldn't have had at that time, which is swipe. It's like kids do it all the time. Like, that's not interesting, swipe, right? So like, yeah, I wasn't like everybody else, and I could have paused and really, had that take over for me, or I could have just been like, okay, and next, like, how am I going to just keep moving forward, right? And so I wish it was something you could teach people, but I think teaching by example is something that matters, right? Because I find when I mentor people, I often say to them, you don't need to ask for permission. You can just go do it. You can give yourself permission. And frankly, what's the worst case thing that's going to happen? Like, they pick yourself up and you go again.
Right. But we have to be reminded, and then we talked about the power of community to do this. I love this notion of swipe. I mean, it's very visual. It's very part of what now is, and it is. All of a sudden, the image changes. You're on to the next thing, and in a day and age when we are on to the next, we're very much on to the next thing. This whole idea about being others, I think working with women and girls, this is, I think, a universal theme. All of us are conditioned in some way to feel like we are not enough who we are. That whatever the community is that we interpret it is, there's an otherness about us. Do you know what I mean?
I think as women, we live with that. I mean, I go back to the memoir. I go back and I reread it. If I ever have to reread it, it's like a cringe. It's really hard for me to read it myself. And I'm so critical of it, right? And so I almost never want to go back, and writing requires you to go back and reread it and redo it, right? And that's actually really hard for me, because then I think, like, who cares? Who's going to care about my story, right? We all have those moments. And then you have to just be like, okay, maybe nobody's going to care, but I'm just going to do it because it's meditative, or because maybe this will lead me to something else. And I think, like, we all have to acknowledge it's hard.
It's hard. It's hard. So tell us about your Mickey story, your Mickey and the moving to Argentina, because I think all of that kind of builds this momentum about addressing fear. And then somebody did ask about how you work through that, but tell these stories, because I think they're funny, but they're instructive.
Yeah. So, I was in college in the 80s. And at that time, the Gap had a campaign called Individuals of Style that was very successful for them. They basically had celebrities wearing their white t-shirts. I think Sharon Stone went in one of the turtlenecks at the Oscars. And this campaign was so successful that they localized it by market. So in New York, they would feature, Jim Jarmusch, because he was an underground film celebrity, but really only known to sort of like the New York community. And when I was in college, I used to write sort of a travel column, because, I had endless energy. So I would write a column for the newspaper, for the Barnard Bulletin, about like places to go to be an insider. And as somebody where I had always been the outsider, the idea of becoming an insider was a real thing for me, right? I would like try and study sort of the culture to understand how I could feel like an insider. So I had this insiders column, and I had this idea of taking that column and actually putting it together with the Gap ads, almost like a travel guide, where it was implied that if you went to, Max Fish, you'd see Jim Jarmusch, because that's really where Jim Jarmusch used to hang out, or Tom Lurie, or whoever. And I mocked it up into a little book. We now call this branded content. I mocked it up in a little book. I tried to get a meeting with somebody at the Gap. I went, it got nowhere. It sort of sat on the shelf. And then fast forward to when I was at business school, somebody saw the mock-up and they were like, oh, Mickey Drexler, the president of the Gap, just came to speak at our class. He's so accessible. You should just send it to him. And this was pre-internet. I mailed the book, never thinking anything of it, you know, with a note, and the phone rang. And this is a true story. The phone rang and it was Mickey Drexler. And he said, do you want a job at the Gap? I mean, basically we had this conversation and he wanted to know if I wanted a job at the Gap. I wasn't looking for a job at the Gap. But he was super accessible, and we got into talking about like the places I'd written up in San Francisco. And he said, oh, if you come to San Francisco, this is my schedule. Here's my 800 number. You know, please call Susan Cooper, our head of recruiting. And then I sort of just got off the phone, sort of not quite sure what had happened to me. And then, you know, I didn't really follow up immediately because it was hard to take in. But fast forward 2 weeks, and the phone rings, and it's Susan Cooper, his head of recruiting. And she said, Mickey Drexler said I was going to hear from you. I haven't heard from you. And I didn't end up taking a job at the Gap. But what ended up happening is they said to me, this idea is a marketing idea. And that's really what opened up the idea of my going into marketing as a career, because I didn't know anybody who was a marketer. I didn't know what that job was. And I think that, right, I could have thought about all the reasons not to send the book. Right. It was just the motion forward, right? Like it didn't lead to that immediate thing, but it led to something that led to something else. Right. And I think, I try and instill that into other people because, by the way, it wasn't perfect. And, you know, there's all kinds of reasons I could have done it better, differently, whatever, but it was just the motion forward. It's like putting that energy out into the universe does bring energy back to you.
Okay, so I'm going to share the other story that I shared with you the other day because I think this is helpful. And actually, Becky Steen, she'll know this guy. So in this, I want to tell you, well, we'll get to Argentina in a second, but so the idea that you just reached out and you sent a letter. So the other day, you know, we're getting ready for Gen W, and I get this newsletter from the CEO of Korn Ferry. I'm sure a lot of other people do it, but this guy's Gary Bernstein, and I really liked his words. I liked what he had to say, the way he wrote. It was inspirational. I would tag some of it. And so I'm like, you know what, Gen W, it has all the things that he talks about. He had just written this letter about being involved in community and helping to change people's lives. And I'm like, Gary, I want to raise my hand because you've inspired me, and here's the work that I'm doing, and perhaps you would like to participate, and invite him. And I did it. And I honestly, as I did it, I said, this is Maryam in my soul. Well, guess what? I didn't hear back from him. So my immediate reaction, which I have not yet gotten over, which was like, really? Are you really that person you say you are? Because, you know, I invited you. I mean, you could have had anyone say, thanks for your note, something, nothing. So what does Maryam say to all of us who feel rejected by this situation? What's your advice?
My advice was the same that I told you the other day. It was like, keep going. I mean, I think you have to focus on the goal, right? Is the goal to actually get him because he has insights to give to the Generation W community? Then it's not about you, right? So
it's not about me at all, right?
It's not about you. And I think it is, listen, I see this with my own kids. It's very hard not to, in that moment, feel like it's about you. And frankly, I say to them all the time, nobody else is thinking about you. I mean, I wish that was the case, but really, who knows what's going on with him, right? So go again. I mean, the other thing is I always was one of those people who had a plan A, B, and C, right? And so you just don't know what's going to work out. You might chase your Korn Ferry guy, and that may pan out or not, but you're probably trying to get multiple different people to be on the podcast, right? So you just don't know when the timing will happen. And I think putting a lot of bets is definitely a good way to go. I get it. I think I've done personal, right? He wrote this note. You know, this is what I value. I'm like, okay, I value the same things. Let's connect. And like, now I understand. I get like, you know, right now I have so many hundreds of emails. It's hard for me to get to them. So but I spend time at night. I'm whittling it down. So maybe he hasn't whittled it down to me yet. Who knows? No, but I should go again. Don't take it personally. That's my headline. You don't know what else is going on in somebody else's life.
So what somebody wants to know is, how do you remain positive when you don't get that call back or whatever?
Look, I mean, I think that's why having lots of different things going, because he may not respond, but if you're trying, you know, to get several different people, somebody else may respond, right? So I think you just have to trust and keep going. you know, and I think having sort of a kitchen cabinet of friends who you can turn to, because there are always moments where we have doubt. When I wasn't working and somebody would call and say to me, it's crazy that you're taking time off, it's just a terrible idea. You know, would that place doubt in my mind? Of course. I mean, there was a part of me that sort of believed I'd be okay, but I'm not immune. And I would call Donna and she would say, you're going to be fine. Right? We all need a kitchen cabinet of people who we can turn to in those moments.
More than fine.
Reassure us.
Absolutely more than fine. Well, all right. Well, we put together some of your little wisdom. You have a lot of wisdom, but we put on one graphic, so it made it little, which is all about not asking for permission, just going for it. So your number one thing said, put fear aside, and somebody from our Facebook group just said the question, how do you work through that? How do you put your fear aside? Do you have any little triggers or tips or whatever that you can share? Because putting fear aside, I don't know, I guess I need another step.
I think a lot of it is trying, you know, people say, what are all the expressions we see? It says like pretend until you become kind of a thing. Like, I think part of it is just, you know, I say to Natasha, my daughter, like channel somebody else. What would somebody else do? Right. And sometimes being able to pull out of yourself actually is a helpful technique. Right. And it's like, I don't know, I remember when she was little, I'd be like, you know, what would Rihanna do? Would she take no for an answer? She'd probably just keep going. And just that exercise of it not being about you. Think about people who you look up to, who are sort of role models, who are, you know, not necessarily people we know, like, and how would they behave? Like, let's talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Like, there had to have been many moments where she had fear, right? But if you think to yourself, what would she do in this moment? That could be a way to actually put fear aside and sort of channel her. I think
that's a really great idea. And I'm just going to tell, as I was preparing for this UNGA conference, as I told you, I was nervous, and I was nervous. I was. And someone said, hey, did you see Hillary Clinton's article that she just wrote in The Atlantic? It's coming out in October about Beijing. She was there. And what I loved about her first 3 paragraphs, she talked about how afraid she was of so many different issues, of what people told her and all those things that happened. And you know what? It helped me feel calmer. You're right. Thank you. It did. I mean, I just lived this. So yes, I'm affirming that advice. I hope everybody else is thinking about it that way too. That is so helpful. All right. You're waiting for me. Number 2, just ask.
Well, look, if you don't ask, you can't get. I say this all the time. I mean, you know, it's so funny. I have 2 college kids, and I'll be like, well, did you ask your advisor? And it's like they're mortified. Like, asking somehow is like a terrible thing. And I love Adam Grant's book, right? Because I think, you know, asking someone for help, and yes, it requires vulnerability. So we'll all give a nod to Brene Brown, but I also think it's a gift. Like, people feel better when they can actually be of purpose to something. Mm-hmm. So really, if you think about the ask as a flip and think to yourself, you're actually giving somebody the ability to do something for somebody else, and that actually makes them feel good. Like, maybe that's one way to think about it, because the ask, particularly if you're asking from a place of authenticity, you know, like, that's okay, right? I also think, like, another thing on the ask is trying to put yourself in that other person's shoes. This is something I learned working with a lot of really good salespeople, which is like, understand what's in it for them, right? And like, oftentimes people go, like, when they're trying to sell something, right, and they're just like selling, and it's really not about that, right? It's really about thinking about, like, okay, well, what's the thing that would be interesting to the person on the other side? It sort of goes back to the idea that it's not about you. And if you can put it into that context, right? If you can think about like how your ask fits into that, that's also another good technique. But, you know, I think like anything else, if you can't ask, right, the worst case scenario is the fear, because you're fear that you're going to be embarrassed, or they're not going to respond, or you're going to take it personally. These are all very interconnected concepts. And then you have to think like, okay, that's the worst case scenario, and somehow you're still gonna be living, so it's okay.
And you know what? I don't need to laugh, because that's really serious stuff in this day and age, right? Because we really have to make sure that we, our family, our friends, our parents, all make it to the next day. Every day we start at 0 again, right? Let me just say hello to everybody. It's halftime. For Refresh today. We're with the amazing, indomitable, energetic Maryam Banikarim. an amazing human who has accomplished so much, and currently, aside from being the mother of 2 incredible kids, she is the CMO of Nextdoor, and we're going to talk about community in a second. I wanted to say on the third one, hold on, the third one is, I just wrote it down. The third one is know your community, right? That was the third one. Your community matters. Okay, yes. All right, so we're not afraid anymore. We have the gumption to ask, because by asking, we're just helping other people, which, by the way, I do feel like that often, and believe it. And then your community matters. So let's talk about that a little bit. Okay, Sherry, thank you.
Look, I think on the community front, right, like there's so much data now that actually shows that people who are connected to their community actually are like better off financially, emotionally. I mean, there's just tons of data around this topic. And I think as we've become more virtually connected, we've become more disconnected from people like physically close to us. And it actually matters to know the people like near you, your neighbors, right? And so I think, you know, this kind of interestingly connects to Nextdoor. And I suppose is part of the reason that I ended up coming back into the workforce and taking this role is that there was a study that Pew did that said 28% of Americans didn't know a single one of their neighbors, right? Charles Blow, the opinion reporter for the Times, wrote this story, and he talked about how he was more connected than ever on Facebook to all these people, but like feeling more disconnected. And wasn't it crazy that 28% of people didn't know a single one of their neighbors? And so the whole premise of Nextdoor was to say, how can we leverage technology to actually solve this problem, connect you to those closest to you, with the idea of getting you offline so that you connect with them in person, right? That was sort of the premise of the entire Nextdoor platform. And, you know, as somebody who inherently loves this idea of connecting, and it's one of the ways I feel like I sort of belong, you know, I know that when I go to Joe's coffee shop and the guy knows my name and says, do you want the regular, right? It's sort of like that movie, the sitcom Cheers. Like
Right.
there is this incredible sense of like belonging that comes with that. And I don't mean belonging because we want people to tell us we're okay. I just mean it gives you a connectivity, a connection to a sense of place, right? And today we're all so connected to our sense of place, right? I'm usually running to the subway, but now I don't take the subway as often because I'm working from home. And I find myself noticing the trees and the leaves. And we actually just did this research, and people literally are using earth tones, right? They're noticing the bird. And my husband says to me, like, did you never know that trees existed? It's kind of a confusing thing, but we've been sort of we were like statically in place in a way where we weren't before. And so that sense of place matters, as do the people that you're connected to, whether it's the guy from the coffee shop or Troy and Nathaniel who live down the street from me, or Joan, who we know, we all became friends with Joan because she was a regular at the coffee shop at 7 o'clock every morning. Joan was on the corner, you know, in that corner table at the coffee shop. Joan and her husband, Bob, haven't left their apartment since February, right?
Wow,
They don't
wow,
leave,
wow, right?
you know, because of COVID. And we do calls with Joan to check in on her and Bob, right? And so, yeah, you're super busy, but that 5-minute phone call to Joan to just check in on her, like it matters, right? And so checking in on Joan, like is just part of my fabric of my community, right? And we all sort of talk about like, what, have you talked to Joan, or what's happening with Conrad, or what's happening with Bergamot? I mean, your neighborhood isn't just about your neighbors, but also about your small businesses, right? All of whom are struggling today. And all the public services that, you know, in New York, I'm here to tell you, New York is not dying, but we are having less.
We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that too.
We have less sanitation support. And one of the amazing things is that like the Block Association has coordinated volunteers actually picking up litter. And then you can, so Saturday, it took 10 minutes. Andy and I joined them and we like picked up the litter on the block, right? And then you can adopt a garbage can. Like people are just stepping up to help. And honestly, the thing that was craziest about having joined Nextdoor, because I joined 3 weeks before the pandemic, was how quickly people started offering to help each other on the platform, not just in the US, globally. To say, I'm able-bodied, I can run groceries for you, right? Like just like a human moment. And I think that, yeah, is it complicated? Are there all kinds of issues that we're all living through? Is it incredibly difficult? And yet there is this incredible thing that you see when we all come under pressure, which is like this humanity, and connecting with your neighbors is like, by the way, they're your first line of defense, right? And so, you know, I think that's something that's going to stay when we get to the other side of COVID. Like being connected and knowing each other and just being there for each other is something that is inherent in our nature, and I think has come into full relief.
So you mentioned research, I was going to ask you, but Becky Steen, who's out on the West Coast, recruited a new employee, didn't know he lived two doors down for the past 12 years.
Right. Hi, Becky. Yes. And Becky and I also know each other. And I think that's one of the other things that we're seeing is that people, like, so for us, we've had like an 80% increase in terms of daily active users because the product is something that you really comes into full relief in moments like this. And I think that literally you're like, you know, the other day somebody posted in my local Nextdoor, it was a couple who had been diagnosed with COVID and they needed help finding somebody to walk their dog. And I noticed that I knew the person who offered to help. I didn't know that she was on Nextdoor, and you know, she's like, "Oh, wait, you're in Chelsea?" I was like, "Yeah, we're all in Chelsea." So I think that's kind of the incredible thing is that none of us actually knew that, Becky, and now we do.
It's pretty incredible. But you talk about research. What else is research telling you? People need to be connected. You'd say we have.
Well, there's a famous book called The Rabbit Effect, right? And Kelly's actually on our board. And if you look at that research, or even the Putnam book that's called Bowling Alone, there's a lot of research that shows that as society has become, you know, what it is today, we've become more disconnected from each other. And so, you know, one of the things I remember as a kid is visiting, and for a while we lived with my grandparents. Their house butted against others, right? It was almost like a brownstone row. So like, you were connected to the neighbors. Like we played with the kids, like in the street, right? Like you could call out from your window to somebody else. There was an incredible joy to that. I think, you know, we all get fancier and move to bigger homes separate from each other. Like people don't know their neighbors, right? You don't see them. You don't ever see them. And so that idea of like I have such memories as a kid of loving that experience of going out into the street and being able to just join the game or hearing people like from my balcony. It's one of the reasons I love going to places and living in places where I'm in proximal like relationship to my neighbors, right? That I can't actually, that I do get to see them. Like I love walking outside and being able to see my neighbors. I don't have to always like, you know, spend time chatting and whatever, but just knowing they're there is actually something that I know actually is like core for me on a daily basis. I
just want to let you know, speaking of neighbors, friends, and community, we're welcoming Farouk Hosseini, who just joined us. She just got out of her meeting. Isn't that great? It's wonderful.
All together virtually.
I know. Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. Like people are like, they say they're zoomed out, but every time I get on like even something like this, I guess there's business Zoom meetings that, you know, you can tear your hair out of, I guess. I hope ours aren't like that. But I feel like people really want to connect, right? They do want it. And if this is all what we have, that we are inclined to make the most of it. Are you seeing that in the research? What are you experiencing?
Look, humans have a need to connect. Like, and some people need to connect for 5 minutes. You know, Joan doesn't like to do Zooms. She likes to do phone calls, but people do need to connect. That is definitely true. You're seeing that, right? And there is a difference between a work call for Zoom where you're on, you know, having to like process in that way versus like the other day, actually, some friends from business school arranged a Zoom phone call. We had somebody from Turkey, somebody from London, somebody from Colorado. And it was kind of amazing actually hearing about their experiences around the world and how it was different. And it was just joyful, right? So I don't equate, it's not that I'm down on my work Zoom calls. I just mean, it's not the same when you're talking to your friends and you're sort of just reconnecting than when you're on, you know, like just going through the litany of work that you have to do. So
no, listen, I had a chance a couple of weekends to go to visit with some friends. It was nirvana. I mean, beyond. It was just so special. So let's just we have this theme about your work and your life and your passion around community. And also this thing about not being afraid and just acting. So we know that we've heard a lot about how New York's down the tubes. I don't believe it. I'm a born and bred New Yorker. I think New York has the most incredible resilience, but you did get tired of that. So, you know, what do you do about that?
So, you know, I think, you know, the articles about New York being dead obviously started coming in August. And, you know, I think we were just voted in, you know, I think they just called us an anarchist state. So I'm here to tell you, because I'm reporting live from New York, that is not in fact true. But, you know, there was a
By the way, I just want to let you know, the woman I was just on the phone with from Russia, she said the same thing about Russia. Don't believe what you see. We're really okay. but okay, go ahead.
Honestly, like when I left New York for a little bit and I was in Connecticut, when I would go on a walk, people would stop me and be like, oh my God, is New York okay? Like it was on fire. And I was going back and forth and like, it was like, no, that's not actually true. Now, listen, it is a difficult time in the city. There's no question about that. And there will be a difficult period. We definitely have issues, but New York is never down and out for the count. Like I've been here through 9/11, through Sandy, like New Yorkers are incredibly resilient. And one of the things about the city is that people pull together and they get to the other side. And I think, so after I, the 7th or 8th article where I got super frustrated, I basically emailed, and funny enough, I started with women. I emailed about 20 people and the list actually then grew to 50 people on that day, where I was like, okay, I'm tired of all these articles. What are we going to do? And we all got on the phone and we actually came up with an idea of really as a volunteer side hustle, figuring out how to inject a little spontaneity into the city through the creative arts community as a way to sort of inject a little energy and really reposition this narrative around the city being dead, right? One of the things that New York does is it actually celebrates sort of this incredible diverse community where people actually can feel a sense of belonging. So anyway, I can report 5 weeks in, we ended up creating something called nycnext.org, all volunteer based at this point, where everybody's volunteering their time to try and create these pop-up events in different neighborhoods, which we're not promoting ahead of time because of COVID, right? We don't want to create any social distancing issues, but just inject a little joy into a neighborhood. We've raised money and we're paying the artists because the artist community is incredibly hard hit. I don't know how much you know about what's happening here in New York for the Broadway community, for example. There's more revenue generated by Broadway than all of the sports leagues here combined.
Wow.
Broadway has been shut down for months, and it's quite likely that it's not going to come back until sometime fall of 2021. That's a lot of impact on people, not just the stars, but I mean the ushers, the tech staff, right? And so we're actually going to have some people perform in like very socially distanced way in these different neighborhoods and different boroughs. We're actually using the funds we've raised to pay them. I mean, it's not huge, but it's a little bit. And I think it's just to remember like what makes New York great. And really the idea is by doing that to sort of ingest some energy back into that neighborhood and have people go to the restaurants and sort of put more energy back into the small businesses that are around there. And also people have had all kinds of ideas. It's a totally open source idea where people are like, okay, can we put art in the storefronts that are empty? Right? Like, I think one of the things that happens in periods like this is people become incredibly inventive. And so in Miami, some people were using empty storefronts as rehearsal spaces for the artist community because they actually need spaces to rehearse that are socially distant. And that's a great experience for somebody who has an empty storefront because nobody wants it to look like an eyesore, right? Not the person who's trying to rent it or the neighborhood. So how can you reimagine those? On Columbus Avenue, 3 teachers have pulled together. They've taken the storefronts and they're actually making it into a gallery. They're getting people to submit their art, and they're actually going to make a walkway gallery where people can just walk down and appreciate art, right? Like everybody can do these kinds of a thing in their cities. You're sort of seeing that pop up. And so, we started this effort in New York, and it's been amazing to see people say things like, oh my God, it's so great to work on something that just feels positive, right? Because we all sort of feel at times like we're stagnating.
Right.
And so,
totally. And you know what I love? Listen, this goes back to what you said earlier, and it's something that I feel through my entire being, which is this whole idea, we don't have to ask permission, right? We do a volunteer day here in Jacksonville. We didn't have to ask anyone's permission to go do it. We can solve problems. Right? You're speaking to the 2 things, the strength of community to act of their own volition, you don't have to ask permission. You don't have to be afraid. You can just do it. And then the beauty of all of that, I don't know why I keep thinking of Joanne Cohn here, because I'm thinking, okay, I'm always up for picking up yet one more project. I just love all of that. And it was basically a couple of phone calls. I mean, I am sure there's work, but it's open source work, and it's the positivity in all of that. And it has a direct result, right?
So I see Megan's comment in the chat. So
Yes.
Megan, somebody told me about the flower arranger today, and I looked at his site. It's crazy. This is a guy who's a florist, and I'm not going to remember his name, but I'll send it to you guys, who basically does the most amazing flower arrangements for like the most high-end events, like the Met Gala and things like that. And he's basically taken to doing these flower arrangements literally in garbage cans around cities in different boroughs, right? One of the amazing things that's happened in New York is that basically, you know, we're going to have an event where we're going to have this guy who's a Grammy award-winning musician who usually plays in Lincoln Center. He's going to play on the corner. So all of a sudden, art has left sort of this high-end place and it's out into the neighborhood in the cities in an accessible way. And that's totally what this guy, this florist, has been doing. It's awe-inspiring. Joy, you're asking about the arts community. 100%, that arts community is impacted in all of your neighborhoods. It's not just Broadway. I just have big numbers because I know it's a multi-billion-dollar initiative here in the city. And by the way, like getting all of us to step up to help and support our communities, no matter where you live, because guess what? We all care about where we live. And even if you move to a different neighborhood, you're going to care. You pick a neighborhood because you care about that neighborhood. Get involved. Like it's going to be up to all of us. And our goal is to be open source. I have it on my list to actually track down this florist and plug him into the system, because it's going to take pulling all these together to sort of change the narrative. There are people doing this already. It's not like we're the only ones to come up with it, but we know how to amplify it, and we know how to like use our social capital to sort of give it noise and connectivity and do this through partnership. And that's definitely the thing that's going to find all our way through. And by the way, I'm inspired by my neighbors on Nextdoor, because they're all doing things like they've started this litter group where people are showing up to, like, it can be as small as calling your neighbor, as picking up the garbage, or as figuring out a pop-up, or I don't know, solving the world's hunger problems. Whatever it is, you got to do something, right? And I think
I will tell you that something is happening cool like that right here. There's a program that has just been revitalized. There's a program called 12 Who Care. I was asked to judge, and I was given stories submitted by family, church fellow members of 25 people in our community that are doing amazing things, right? From kids to octogenarians, all races, ethnicities, all different kind of projects. And as I read what these people, unsung heroes, are doing, it filled me with such pride. Right? It makes you feel so good about where you live. I am so proud of WTLV for doing this, right? Calling these people out, and they're going to recognize them soon. I'm excited for that.
No, listen, I mean, one of my favorite things is like, you don't know what your skill is that you can give, right? And so I think one of the things I've learned sort of from this side hustle project is like, the more specific you are so people know how they can help, it really actually helps your effort, right? Because people want to help, but they actually need to figure out how to step in and do it. But one of my favorite Nextdoor stories, and I think it was in Canada, was that a guy who was a photographer like wanted to figure out how to like give some creative energy. And what he offered for his neighbors was he did stoop portraits. So he would basically show up in a socially distant way and take a picture of a family on their stoop and then give it to them, right? Like they were totally socially distant. It was such an amazing idea. And I think that we're seeing that kind of thing. One person dressed up like a taco and offered to drive by different people's neighborhoods just to cheer up the kids who've been stuck at home, right? Like it can be anything as big or as small as you choose, but finding a way, it actually changes your own energy. It's not just about other people. I actually think it makes you feel good too. I mean, at least it does for me, so I can talk for myself.
No. You can talk for me too, which you often do, and I'm so happy. It changes your own energy. I'm writing that down. I think that's so important. You know, I'm thinking about this. We announced for Generation W for our 10th anniversary, our theme is intentional. With, you know, obviously intent, get the fun thing about that. And I'm wondering, based on this thinking about community, and we are a community, broad-based, but even so, whether we should have our community vote on something or two that's intentional that we would like to accomplish. You can accomplish it in your own community. We just do it all together. You know, that kind of idea of, you know what, we're going to not only help change the parameters of where we live, make somebody happy, but we're going to, as you said, change your own energy too. I find it incredibly inspiring, Mary.
But think about all the business, right? Like we're a group of women. Here's the reason I started with women is that women are doers, right? I'm like, don't just tell me, oh yes, don't complain. Tell me how you can help. And people say to me like, I don't want to take over. And I say, you're not taking over. Here you go, take it. And I think that women are just naturally doers, right? And so figure out how you can actually empower the doers in your community to help in any way that comes to life, right? Whether you care about the arts, whether you care about the small businesses, whether you care about like the homelessness issue. I mean, you know, I noticed that somebody had posted about some of the divisiveness that sometimes you see on Nextdoor, and I don't want to ignore that question because obviously that's something that I obviously care about deeply as well. I think, you know, one of the things that's different for Nextdoor than it is of any of the other platforms is that we're not a freedom of speech platform. We really are a community-based platform, right? And I
think Joy was going to ask you about that. Yes.
It's really important to say. So a good analogy for that is that, you know, I invite you to my house because you're my neighbor. You come with other people. You can disagree at the table, and you can disagree vehemently, but you have to do so not in a way that's harmful to somebody else, right? So the minute you take that bottle of wine and empty it on somebody's head because you're upset, then you know what, you're going to be asked to leave. And so, you know, we're quite aware this is an issue we've been working on since 2015. It's not a new issue. We've been working with Jennifer Eberhardt, who's a preeminent scholar on this topic at Stanford for many years.
Oh my God, of course I should have called you to get her. We tried to reach out to her. We didn't hear back from her, damn it.
She's amazing. See? She's amazing.
All right, we're putting that on the list. I have to. That's so funny. She is amazing, right?
Amazing.
I'm so glad.
Definitely listen to her TED Talk. I mean, you know, the work with her is actually what led to what we call the kindness reminder, which basically, right, there's many ways you can try and tackle this issue online, but one of the issues is a solution we came up with Jennifer and her team at Spark was that while you're posting, to actually slow you down a nanosecond. It's called the kindness reminder, because if the system detects that you're about to use a word or say a combination of phrases that might be hurtful to somebody else, it slows you down and says, are you sure you want to post that the way you do? Right? And it's sort of like the thing we tell each other, which is like, oh, you know what, write that letter and burn it. Like, just think, give yourself a
Yes.
That's what that kindness reminder was designed to do. And we've been actually iterating that for COVID. We're going to iterate it, you know, as we go towards the election season. I mean, it's definitely something that we're quite mindful of. I mean, obviously not perfect, but very, very much committed. And I think that's why Sarah, our CEO, sent out a note in June about our position on this topic, and that unequivocally, there is no room for racism on our platform. Now, that doesn't mean we're not perfect and things don't happen, but, you know, to be clear about our intention and our actions, that's what we believe in. It's why all of us show up and work around the clock, frankly, when I'm not working on my side hustle. But I do think that one of the things that gives me hope, if anything, is that on Nextdoor, you don't pick and choose your friends. You actually are connected to those living closest to you. And sometimes that leads to difficult conversations, sometimes to conversations that have to come off the platform because they don't abide by the community guidelines. But sometimes I've seen neighbors actually find a pathway forward because they actually engage in a conversation, not with somebody sort of in their own bubble, but by people who actually, who's, you know, you can walk in somebody else's shoes and find a pathway forward. And we also see those stories, right? And if I can find any ray of hope, it's like, I know that it's in finding common ground and seeing each other as human beings that we're going to find our pathway forward, right? Because I have to believe that that's our future.
We have to believe it, and we're going to continue to work on it. And of course, I'd love to stay on with you, but our time is just about up here. I want to thank you. There's a bunch of, Angie wanted to know about, Angie has a question for you, and we're going to have to just connect you with Angie, because I don't think we're going to have time, Angie, which had to do with your energy and how do you stay still, because she's like you, like us, right? She just keeps moving.
I make my family crazy. That's the answer.
We're going to welcome Shelley Brindle next week. Mayor Brindle of Westfield, New Jersey, had a 25-year career in entertainment, and then went on, felt the calling for public office. When I first talked to her, she was running for city council, and she said, screw it, I might as well run for mayor. Those experiences that she has as a mom, as somebody who is affecting change on a policy level for cities is going to be great. And she is, like you, Maryam, just filled. Do you know Shelley?
I don't think so.
Okay,
but
she's
like, I want to know everyone. And
I know you do. All right, we'll have to get you with Shelley Brindle, because she spends a lot of time with Shelley Diamond, who are both they're both diamonds. Before we go, I want to thank everybody. Thank you. We mentioned Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I can't help but think about her and her work. You said women are doers. Well, she was an unbelievable doer, writer, all of her work. what's in front of us is a bit daunting, I think. It was interesting that many of the women on the call I just had, everyone quoted her and they all had a different quote, which is also great. So before we leave each other, let's celebrate Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg with this short video.
I, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States,
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. A system of justice will be the richer for diversity of background and experience. It will be the poorer in terms of appreciating what is at stake and the impact of its judgments if all of its members are cast from the same mold.
What advice would you give a young woman entering the law profession as an attorney or a law clerk?
I hope that all of you will spend part of your time thinking about people who need your help and offering it.
If you could change one thing about the Constitution, what would it be and why?
I would add an equal rights amendment to the Constitution.
What gives you the most hope for the future?
My granddaughters. I'm very proud of my eldest granddaughter, who is a lawyer. She and other young people like her, I think, will help us get back on track.
Right? Deeply moved. And I've seen it so many times.
She's amazing.
Yeah. So, hey, I hear the rallying cry. There's a lot for us to do. And let's continue to think about each other in our spirit and conversation today about community and neighbors, about changing other people's energies and our own. Maryam, thank you so much for this delightful, inspiring, wonderful conversation and the wonderful you that is you.
Thank you for having me. Really, it was amazing.
Lots of love. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next week with Mayor Shelley Brindle. And if anyone needs anything during the week, hey, you know where to find us. Take care.